The scent of lilies was a poison I couldn't escape, thick and cloying in the cathedral air like the perfume at a wake. My fingers trembled around the bouquet of white peonies borrowed, like everything else I wore today, as the organ music swelled for a groom who would never appear. Each note was an accusation. Each second of silence from the guests behind me was a knife between my ribs. I checked my phone, hidden among the flowers. The notification glowed like a brand. AC account frozen, federal hold. My breath caught. This wasn't just abandonment. This was something far worse. Grace. My gallery assistant, Mira, materialized at my elbow, her face pale beneath her makeup. He's not coming. I just spoke with his best man. Zach left a note. The note. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. I'd known the moment I'd walked into the cathedral and felt the wrongness in the air. The way the light through the stained glass seemed too sharp, too accusing. The way the guests, mostly Zach's colleagues from the auction houses, collectors I'd authenticated pieces for, gallery owners who'd sneered at my scholarship kid background watched me with a mixture of pity and something else. Something that looked like fear. Whispers erupted like wildfire through the pews. I caught fragments. The FBI outside. They say she was forging. Millions in stolen art. My corset felt like it was crushing my lungs. The cathedral's vaulted ceiling stretched above me, endless and suffocating. I'd restored frescoes in churches like this. Spent hours on scaffolding, studying brushstrokes that were centuries old. And now I couldn't even look up without feeling like the angels in the painted clouds were judging me. Miss Leonard. A voice, official and cold, cut through my spiral. A man in a dark suit, not wedding guest dark, but federal agent dark, stood at the end of the aisle. His hand rested on something at his hip. We need you to come with us. Panic flooded my veins. I didn't... My voice cracked. I don't know what Zach told you, but I didn't... Ma'am, this will be easier if you cooperate. The cathedral doors exploded open. The sound reverberated through the stone chamber like thunder, silencing every whisper, every breath. Heads turned in unison. Even the federal agent froze. He entered like a shadow given form, tall, broad-shouldered, flanked by two men whose suits were so precisely tailored they might as well have been armor. But it was the man in the center who commanded every eye in the room. His suit was charcoal gray, the kind of fabric that whispered of obscene wealth, and his dark hair was swept back from a face that belonged on a Renaissance sculpture. All sharp angles and aristocratic beauty, but it was his neck that made my stomach drop. Beneath the crisp collar of his dress shirt, black ink curled upward, the tail of something larger, something deliberately displayed. A serpent, or a dragon, the tattoo of the Kangpe, the Korean organized crime syndicates I'd read about in art theft reports. He walked down the aisle with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd never been told no. His gaze swept over the crowd, collectors, agents, my terrified assistant, before settling on me. Dark eyes, unreadable, consuming. I felt pinned in place, a butterfly under glass. His guards fanned out, positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the cathedral with practiced efficiency. One of them murmured something into a radio. The federal agent's hand moved away from his weapon, and something in his posture shifted from aggressive to wary. Gracie Leonard. The stranger's voice was low, resonant, with the barest trace of an accent that turned my name into something almost dangerous. He stopped 3 feet from me, close enough that I could detect the scent of his cologne cedarwood and something darker, something that made my pulse spike. I managed a nod, my voice trapped somewhere in my constricting throat. My name is Kong Ye-jun. He said it as though I should recognize it. When I showed no reaction, something flickered in his expression. Surprise? Amusement? You don't know who I am. Should I? I whispered. His gaze flicked to the empty space where Zach should have been standing, then back to me. Something cold and predatory moved behind his eyes. Your fiancé worked for me, indirectly. The word fiancé dripped with contempt. He owed me a significant debt, a debt he believed he could escape by. His gaze traveled over my dress, the flowers, the cathedral itself, creating distractions. The cathedral had fallen into a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I don't understand. But I did. God help me. I was beginning to. Zachary Kent stole from me. Ye-jun's voice remained conversational, but there was steel beneath the silk. $2 million in authenticated art pieces that turned out to be extraordinary forgeries. Forgeries that bore your signature restoration technique. The blood drained from my face. I would never... I know. He cut me off. and the certainty in his voice surprised me more than the accusation had. "You were the tool, Miss Leonard, not the thief. Which is why I'm here." One of the federal agents stepped forward. "Mr. Kong, this woman is wanted for questioning in—" Yejun didn't even look at him. He reached into his jacket, every agent in the room tensed, and withdrew a leather portfolio. He handed it to the lead agent with the casual disdain of a king dismissing a servant. "You'll find that Miss Leonard is under my legal protection as of this morning. We filed an emergency injunction in federal court 20 minutes ago citing prosecutorial misconduct. The warrant is suspended pending a hearing. Touch her, and you're in contempt of court." It was a lie. It had to be. But the agent's face as he scanned the documents told a different story. "This is highly irregular," the agent said, but he was already backing away. Yejun finally turned to face him fully, and even I felt the temperature drop. "My lawyers are very expensive. Would you like to test how irregular things can become?" The agents retreated toward the side exit. Not a full withdrawal, but a tactical pause. They'd be back. We both knew it. Yejun turned back to me, and I was struck again by the intensity of his focus. It felt like being seen for the first time in my life. Every flaw, every fear, every desperate hope laid bare beneath that dark gaze. "Your fiancé isn't coming, Miss Leonard." His voice softened fractionally, though not with pity, with something far more dangerous. "Understanding. He was never going to marry you. This ceremony was theater. A distraction while he caught a flight to Singapore with my money and left you holding the brush that painted the forgeries." The bouquet slipped from my numb fingers. White petals scattered across the marble like snow on a grave. "The debt remains," Yejun continued, his eyes never leaving mine. $2 million, plus interest, plus the insult of believing I wouldn't notice. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried through the entire cathedral. "Your fiancé made you collateral in a game you didn't know you were playing." "I don't have that kind of money," I managed. "I don't have any money. I'm an art historian, not." "I know exactly who you are, Gracie Leonard." The way he said my name sent heat racing up my spine despite the fear coiling in my gut. "I know about your scholarship to Columbia. I know about your groundbreaking work on Renaissance underpainting techniques. I know about the loan sharks circling your student debt and the gallery position you lost because you wouldn't authenticate a forgery for a collector with mob connections." Each fact he recited was another violation, proof that he'd been watching me, studying me, long before today. "How?" I breathed. "I make it my business to know the value of things," he said simply. "And you, Miss Leonard, are exceptionally valuable." One of his guards approached, murmuring something in rapid Korean. Yejun nodded once, then returned his attention to me. "We don't have much time. The federal agents are calling for backup, and their patience with my diplomatic fiction is wearing thin. Then what do you want from me?" The words came out sharper than I intended, panic and anger finally finding a voice. Kang Yejun smiled. It was not a comforting expression. "I want you to marry me instead." The world tilted. I heard gasps from the remaining guests, heard Mira's shocked cry, heard the priest make a strangled sound of protest, but all I could focus on was the man in front of me, whose expression remained utterly serious. "You're insane," I whispered. "Pragmatic," he corrected. "Your fiancé left you to face federal charges for art fraud. The evidence against you is circumstantial but damning. You'll spend years fighting it, even if you win. Your career will be destroyed. Your reputation, gone." He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of cedar again, mixed with something else, danger and dark promises. "Or you can marry me, right now, in front of all these witnesses, and the debt is erased." "Why?" I choked out. "Why would you possibly—" "Because Zachary Kent made a critical error." Yejun's voice dropped lower, intimate enough that only I could hear. "He assumed you were just another pretty face with talented hands. But I've watched you work, Miss Leonard. I've seen you identify a Caravaggio from a single brushstroke photograph. I've read your thesis on authenticating pigment degradation in works falsely attributed to the Flemish masters." His gaze held mine, and I felt the weight of everything unsaid pressing between us. "You're not collateral. You're the prize he was too stupid to value." My heart hammered against my ribs. This couldn't be real. This didn't happen in real life. Mafia bosses didn't walk into cathedrals and propose marriage to women they'd never met. Except he had met me. Or at least, he'd been watching me. For how long? "And if I say no?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Something cold and final settled over Yejun's features. Then I collect the debt through other channels. Your ex-fiancé has family, assets. They'll pay for his theft. He glanced toward the pews, where an elderly couple sat frozen in horror. Zach's parents, who'd always treated me with distant politeness. They're innocent in this, of course, but business is business. The threat wasn't even veiled. It was laid out like a contract, clear and merciless. You're a monster, I breathed. Yes, he agreed without hesitation. But I'm a monster offering you a choice, which is more than your fiancé did. Welcome back, my survivors and shadow keepers. Before we step behind the velvet curtain, choose your place. Hit subscribe, press like to seal it, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far the dragon's shadow reaches tonight. From marble galleries to guarded estates. Every click protects the truth. Every comment binds you to the story. Find your sanctuary. Still your breathing, and stay sharp. This story claims a price from everyone who enters. Let's begin. This choice, I would make with my eyes wide open. I placed my hand in Kong Yejun's. His palm was warm, calloused in unexpected places. Not the soft hands of the art collectors I knew, but the hands of someone who'd worked with them, who'd built something from nothing and defended it with violence. His fingers closed around mine with a certainty that made my breath hitch. Not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. Recognition, as if my body understood what my mind refused to accept. This man was going to change everything. Yes, I said, the word barely audible over the rushing in my ears. I'll marry you. The cathedral erupted. Mira's gasp. The priest stuttered protest. The federal agents moving forward, then stopping as Yejun's men shifted into defensive positions. But Yejun never looked away from me. His dark eyes held mine with an intensity that felt like a brand, marking me as his in ways that had nothing to do with the ceremony about to unfold. Efficient, Yejun called out, his voice carrying through the chaos with effortless command. An elderly Korean man emerged from the shadows near the sacristy, dressed in traditional robes, carrying what looked like official documents. We'll need witnesses. Two of Yejun's guards stepped forward without hesitation. The priest of Street Patrick stood frozen, clearly torn between his duty and his terror. Yejun didn't force him. He simply waited, and the weight of that waiting was more compelling than any threat. The ceremony lasted less than 5 minutes. The officiant spoke in Korean, then English, his voice steady and formal. I repeated words I barely heard. My entire awareness focused on the man beside me whose thumb traced small, hypnotic circles against my pulse point. Was he feeling how fast my heart raced? Did he know that beneath the fear and anger, something else was stirring, something that had no business existing in this moment of forced vows and federal surveillance? When the officiant pronounced us married, Yejun lifted my hand to his lips. The kiss he pressed to my knuckles was brief, almost chaste, but his eyes promised things that made heat pool low in my belly despite everything. Mrs. Kong, he murmured, and the name sounded like acclaiming. The federal agents approached as we signed the documents. The lead agent's face was tight with barely controlled fury. This doesn't change anything. We still have questions. Then you may direct them to my attorneys. Yejun produced a business card, with the casual elegance of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. My wife will not be speaking to you without counsel present. My wife. The words should have felt like chains. Instead, they felt like a shield. The drive to Yejun's estate was silent. I sat in the back of a black Mercedes that smelled of leather and danger, watching Manhattan give way to the manicured landscapes of Westchester. Yejun sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, far enough that we weren't touching, but I was hyper-aware of every shift of his weight, every breath he took, every moment his gaze slid toward me in the darkened interior. You're afraid, he said finally, and it wasn't a question. Wouldn't you be? I kept my eyes on the passing scenery, unable to meet that penetrating stare in such close quarters. Of me? Yes. Of the situation? No. I would be planning. A pause, weighted and deliberate. Which are you doing, Gracie? The use of my first name sent a shiver down my spine. Intimate, possessive, both. Good. I felt rather than saw his smile. Fear without planning is paralysis. You're smarter than that. We passed through iron gates that rose like the entrance to another world. The estate sprawled before us, a mansion that belonged in a Gothic novel, all stone and shadows and tall windows that glinted in the fading light. Gardens stretched in geometric perfection. A fountain caught the last rays of sun, water turning to liquid gold. It was beautiful in the way a trap could be beautiful. Meticulously designed, inescapable. The car stopped beneath a portico. Yejun's door opened immediately, his guards moving with synchronized precision. He stepped out, then turned back, extending his hand to me. I hesitated. Once I stepped out of this car, once I crossed the threshold of his home, there would be no going back. His hand remained steady, waiting. Always waiting, never forcing, which somehow made it impossible to refuse. I took his hand and let him guide me into my new prison. The interior of the mansion stole what little breath I had left. Marble floors stretched endlessly, veined with gold that caught the light from crystal chandeliers. Art covered every wall, not the ostentatious displays of new money, but the careful curation of someone who understood beauty, who knew the difference between price and value. I recognized a Monet study, what might have been an early Rothko, a Korean ink painting that predated the Joseon dynasty. "You collect," I breathed, momentarily forgetting everything else. "I acquire what I value." Yejun's voice came from directly behind me, close enough that I felt his breath stir the loose curls at my nape. "And I protect what's mine." The double meaning wasn't lost on me. I turned, and found myself trapped between his body and a console table bearing a Ming vase. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a physical thing, overwhelming and inescapable. Up close, in better light, I could see the details I'd missed in the cathedral. The tattoo that wound up his neck continued beneath his collar, disappearing into the expensive fabric. His jaw was sharp enough to cut, his lips surprisingly full, his eyes so dark they reflected my terrified face back at me like black mirrors. "The master suite is on the 3rd floor," he said softly, and for a moment I thought he meant for us to share it. Panic must have shown on my face because his expression shifted, not quite amusement, but something close. "The East Wing has been prepared for you. Your own suite, your own space." The relief was so intense my knees weakened. He caught my elbow, steadying me, and the touch burned through the fabric of my dress. "I may be a monster, Gracie, but I'm not that kind of monster." His thumb brushed the inside of my elbow, finding the pulse point there, and I knew he felt the way it jumped at his touch. "You'll come to me when you're ready, not before." "And if I'm never ready?" The words came out sharper than I intended, a defense against the heat his nearness generated. Yejun leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing my ear. "Then I'll wait. I've been waiting for years. I can wait longer." He pulled back, releasing me, and the sudden absence of his touch felt like loss. "But Gracie, you will be ready. Sooner than you think." A woman appeared, middle-aged, Korean, dressed in elegant black. Yejun spoke to her in rapid Korean, and she bowed before turning to me with a warm smile that seemed genuine despite the circumstances. "Mrs. Kong, I'm Hana. I manage the household. Please let me show you to your rooms." I followed her up a sweeping staircase, acutely aware of Yejun's gaze tracking my ascent. When I finally dared to glance back, he stood at the base of the stairs, hands in his pockets, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Hunger, perhaps, or patience, or both. The East Wing was a revelation. My suite wasn't a room, it was an apartment unto itself, a bedroom with a 4-poster bed dressed in silk, a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens, a bathroom with a soaking tub carved from a single piece of marble, and my breath caught a study filled with art books, conservation equipment, and a drafting table positioned to catch the northern light. "Mr. Kong had this prepared for you," Hana said gently, watching my reaction. "He hoped you would be comfortable." Comfortable. I was standing in a gilded cage that had been designed specifically for me, with bars made of beauty and consideration. It should have felt more suffocating than the cathedral. Instead, it felt like being seen in a way Zach never had, not in 3 years together. After Hana left, I sank onto the bed and let myself shake. The adrenaline was finally crashing, leaving me hollow and raw. I'd married a stranger, a criminal, a man who'd been watching me for reasons I didn't understand. I should have been planning my escape, figuring out how to get word to the authorities, something. Instead, I found myself thinking about the way his thumb had traced my pulse, the promise in his voice when he said I'd come to him when I was ready, the hunger in his eyes that made me feel like prey and prize all at once. A soft knock interrupted my spiral. I opened the door to find Yejun standing in the hallway, still in his wedding suit, holding 2 crystal tumblers of amber liquid. "You look like you need this," he said, offering me one. I took it because my hands needed something to hold that wasn't the doorframe I was currently gripping like a lifeline. The scotch burned going down, sharp and smoky and grounding. "I need to know something," I said, the alcohol giving me courage. "This marriage. When the FBI investigation is over, when your debt is settled, can I annul it?" Something flickered in Yejun's expression, disappointment, perhaps, or amusement at my naivety. He stepped into my room without invitation, moving to the window that overlooked his domain. The fading light painted him in shades of gold and shadow, turning him into something almost otherworldly. "No," he said simply. My heart stuttered. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, the wedding Zach arranged was never real, Gracie." He turned to face me, and the weight of his revelation pressed against my chest like a physical thing. "The priest was an actor. The license was never filed. Zach wanted you arrested at the altar, maximum humiliation, maximum distraction, while he caught a flight to Singapore. You were never supposed to actually become his wife." The scotch glass slipped from my numb fingers. Yejun caught it before it hit the floor, moving with inhuman speed, and suddenly he was close again, too close, his hand on my wrist to steady me. "But you..." I couldn't finish the sentence. "I brought a real officiant, filed real paperwork. Our marriage is the only legal thing that happened in that cathedral today." His grip on my wrist tightened fractionally, not painful but inescapable. "You're not his discarded bride, Gracie. You're my wife. Legally, binding, real." The room spun. Everything I'd thought I understood shifted beneath my feet. Zach hadn't just left me. He'd orchestrated an elaborate fiction designed to destroy me while he escaped. And Yejun had what? Saved me? Claimed me? Both? "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you do this?" Yejun released my wrist, but his hand didn't move away. Instead, his fingers traced the delicate bones there, mapping me with a thoroughness that made my skin burn. "Because you were always meant to be mine. Zach was just an obstacle I should have removed sooner." "You're insane," I whispered, but I didn't pull away from his touch. "Yes," he agreed, his voice dropping to something dark and velvet. "But so are you, Gracie. You just don't know it yet." He stepped back, giving me space I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. "Rest. Tomorrow, we begin unraveling the web Zach built around you. Tonight, you're safe." He left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a promise and a threat all at once. I stood alone in my beautiful cage, touching my wrist where his fingers had been, and realized with crystalline horror that I believed him. For the first time in 3 years, I felt safe, and that terrified me more than anything else that had happened today. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended reality. I saw Yejun only at meals, breakfast in a sun-drenched conservatory where orchids bloomed in violent profusion, dinner in a formal dining room where we sat at opposite ends of a table built for 20. He never pressed, never demanded. He simply existed in my periphery, a dark star whose gravitational pull I felt even when he wasn't in the room. Hannah gave me free rein of the estate. I explored like a ghost, drifting through halls lined with art that would make museum curators weep. But it was on the third night, unable to sleep, that I found the door. It was hidden behind a Goryeo dynasty screen in the library, a biometric lock that shouldn't have recognized my handprint but did. The door slid open with a whisper of hydraulics, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. Instead, I descended. The underground vault was a cathedral to art. Climate-controlled perfection, museum-grade lighting that flickered on as I entered. And there, centered on the far wall like an accusation, hung a painting I knew intimately because I'd spent 6 months restoring it. The Penitent Magdalene, attributed to a minor Caravaggio follower, except the painting I'd worked on had been in a private collection in Boston, unremarkable except for the unusual pigment degradation in the background. I approached it with trembling hands, my conservator's eye cataloging every detail. The brushwork was too confident for a follower, the chiaroscuro too masterful, the flesh tones too luminous. This wasn't a follower's work. This was Caravaggio himself, and I'd missed it. No worse. I'd cleaned away centuries of overpainting and protective varnish, revealing the master's hand beneath, and I'd never realized what I was uncovering because Zach had fed me a narrative about provenance and attribution that I'd believed without question. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I spun. Yejun stood at the base of the stairs, dressed in black training clothes that clung to his frame, his hair damp as if he'd just finished a workout. The tattoos I'd only glimpsed before were fully visible, now a dragon that wound from his neck across his shoulder and down his arm, rendered in traditional Korean style with scales so detailed they seemed to move in the low light. I didn't. I started, but he waved away my protest. I gave you access. I wanted you to find this. He moved toward me with that predatory grace I was beginning to recognize, stopping close enough that I could smell the clean scent of his soap beneath the faint musk of exertion. Tell me what you see. I see a Caravaggio that shouldn't exist. My voice shook with anger and awe in equal measure. I see a painting that I restored without knowing what it was. I see evidence that Zach played me for a fool. You weren't a fool, Gracie. You were brilliant. Yejun gestured to the painting. You revealed this masterpiece with such care, such precision, that even experts examining the restoration work found nothing suspicious. You made the fake documentation believable because the work itself was flawless. The praise felt like acid. So I'm complicit. You're a victim. His voice hardened. And I'm going to help you understand exactly how you were used. He led me deeper into the vault, past the Caravaggio, past a Vermeer I'd also restored, past 3 more paintings I recognized from my time with Zach. Each one was a revelation. Each one proof that I'd been blind to my own genius because I'd trusted the wrong man. He wasn't stealing fakes and selling them as real, I said slowly, the pattern emerging. He was stealing real masterpieces, having me clean them, and then swapping them for the fakes. Yes. Yejun stopped before a Raphael sketch that made my knees weak. The collectors he sold to myself included were receiving museum-quality forgeries while the real pieces went to a buyer in the Middle East who doesn't care about provenance. How much? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Conservatively, 200 million over 3 years. The number was so absurd it didn't feel real. I'd been working 60-hour weeks in a cramped studio, living on ramen and student loan deferments, while Zach used my hands to steal a fortune. There's more. Yejun pulled out his phone, swiping through images before handing it to me. This was taken 2 weeks before your wedding. The photo showed my apartment building the walk-up in Queens I could barely afford. A woman was letting Zach into the service entrance. A woman with my sister's face. The phone slipped from my numb hands. Yejun caught me, his arms coming around me as my legs gave out. I found myself pressed against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart through the thin fabric of his shirt. And I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't breathe, Yejun commanded, his hand cupping the back of my head, fingers tangling in my curls. Gracie, breathe. I sucked in air that tasted like cedar and danger. My sister was his lover, has been for at least a year. His voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. She helped him plant evidence in your apartment, forged emails in your name, created a paper trail that made you look like the mastermind. The betrayal was a physical thing, tearing through me with claws. Not Zach, I'd mourned him already, mourned the illusion of him, but my sister, my only family, the person who was supposed to stand beside me. I broke. The tears came violent and ugly, the kind of crying that had no dignity, only raw pain, and Yejun held me through it, one hand cradling my head, the other pressed flat against my back, anchoring me to his solid warmth while I shattered. He didn't offer platitudes, didn't tell me it would be okay. He simply held me in an underground vault, surrounded by stolen masterpieces, while I wept for the family I'd lost and the innocence I'd never get back. When the tears finally subsided, leaving me hollow and exhausted, I became aware of our position. I was pressed against him from chest to hip, my face buried in his neck, my hands fisted in his shirt. His hands were on me, possessive, protective, dangerous, and beneath the grief, something else stirred. Something dark and hungry that responded to his nearness like a match to kindling. I pulled back. His arms loosened but didn't release me entirely, his hand sliding to my waist as if reluctant to let go completely. Why did you give me access to this? My voice was wrecked, raw from crying. Why let me see it? Because I need you to understand what you're capable of. His thumbs traced small circles against my hip bones, a touch that felt casual but burned through the thin fabric of my dress. Zach weaponized your genius. I want to empower it. To what end? Revenge. The word was simple, absolute. You're going to help me find every piece he stole. You're going to help me expose him for what he is. And when we're done, he'll have nothing left but the memory of what he threw away. It should have sounded melodramatic. Instead, it sounded like justice. And then? I asked. because I needed to know. When the debt is settled and Zach is destroyed, what happens to me? Yejun's hands tightened on my waist, pulling me fractionally closer. Then you decide who you want to be, Gracie. The victim Zach tried to create? Or the woman I see when I look at you? And who is that? His smile was dark, full of promises that terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. A queen who doesn't know her own power yet. He released me then, stepping back, and the sudden absence of his touch felt like cold water. He moved to a console near the vault entrance, returning with a leather portfolio. "The FBI file on you," he said, handing it to me. "Everything they think they know, every piece of evidence Zach and your sister planted. Study it, find the flaws. Tomorrow we start building your defense." I took the portfolio, its weight somehow worse than the paintings surrounding us. "One more thing." Yejun's voice stopped me as I turned toward the stairs. "Your sister sent Zach a text the morning of your wedding." I waited, knowing I didn't want to hear this but unable to walk away. She told him she was pregnant. His dark eyes held mine, unflinching. She asked him when he was going to tell you that he'd chosen her. The final knife slipped between my ribs with surgical precision. Zach hadn't just used me. He'd replaced me, and my sister had participated in my humiliation with such calculated cruelty that it took my breath away. I left Yejun in the vault and climbed the stairs. But when I reached my suite, I didn't go inside. Instead, I found myself walking through darkened halls to the wing Hana had told me was Yejun's private domain. I shouldn't have. It was madness, dangerous, crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But grief and rage and something darker drove me forward until I stood outside his door. I knocked, before I could think better of it. The door opened almost immediately. Yejun stood in the threshold, still in his training clothes, unsurprised to find me there as if he'd been waiting. "Don't let me be alone tonight," I whispered, hating myself for the need, for the weakness, for the way my body leaned toward his like a flower to the sun. He stepped aside without a word, letting me enter his sanctuary. His suite was spare, all dark wood and clean lines, martial in its simplicity. But there were touches of softness. Books in Korean and English, art not valuable pieces, but things he must have chosen because they moved him. A photograph of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to him. "My sister," he said, following my gaze. "She died when I was 17. The revelation hung between us, an offering of vulnerability in exchange for my own. He poured us both drinks, whiskey this time, not scotch. We sat on opposite ends of a low couch, the space between us charged with everything unspoken. Outside, dawn was beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. "Tell me about her," I said, because I needed to think about something other than my own shattered family. So he did. He told me about Jisoo, brilliant and fierce, who dreamed of being a painter. He told me about the car accident that wasn't an accident, about the debt his family had owed, about the choice he'd made to take his father's place in an organization that dealt in violence and power. "She would have been a better artist than collector," he said quietly. "But she gave me the appreciation for it, taught me to see beauty in broken things." "Is that what I am?" I asked, the whiskey loosening my tongue. "A broken thing you're collecting?" Yejun turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his gaze stole my breath. "You're not broken, Gracie. You're a masterpiece someone tried to paint over. I'm just helping you remember what's underneath." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and tucked a curl behind my ear. His fingers lingered at my jaw, thumb brushing the corner of my mouth, and I felt the touch everywhere. "Sleep," he murmured, withdrawing his hand even as my body swayed toward him. "You're safe here." I curled into the corner of his couch, exhausted beyond measure, and let myself drift. The last thing I felt was Yejun draping a blanket over me, his hand resting briefly on my head in something that felt almost like a benediction. When I woke, sunlight streamed through his windows, and Yejun was gone. But there was a note on the coffee table in elegant script. "The truth is a weapon. Learn to wield it." 2 weeks bled into 3, and the estate became less a prison and more a fortress where I was learning to be someone new, someone harder, someone who understood that survival sometimes looked like sitting across from a Mafia boss at dinner and debating the attribution of a contested Tishan with the passion of a scholar and the precision of a warrior. Yejun was teaching me, though not in ways I'd expected. He showed me his operation, not the violence, but the infrastructure. The legitimate art acquisition firm that masked his more illicit dealings. The network of forgers, authenticators, and collectors who existed in the gray spaces between legal and criminal. He was preparing me to understand the world I'd been moving through blindly, giving me the knowledge Zach had deliberately withheld. And with every lesson, every conversation, every moment we spent in the same room, the tension between us grew. It was there in the way his hand would brush mine when passing documents, in the way his gaze would linger on the curve of my neck when he thought I wasn't looking, in the charged silence that fell when we were alone in his study late at night, ostensibly working but hyper-aware of every breath, every movement, every particle of space between us. I told myself it was just proximity, just the intensity of the situation, just my body's confused response to danger and protection existing in the same man. I was lying. The truth revealed itself on a Thursday night when I couldn't sleep. I'd been dreaming of Zach, of my sister, of standing in that cathedral while everyone watched me crumble. I woke gasping, tangled in silk sheets, and knew I couldn't be alone. I found myself in Yejun's study, where a light still burned despite the late hour. He sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, surrounded by financial documents. The domesticity of the image struck me, this dangerous man doing mundane paperwork, looking almost vulnerable in the lamplight. He glanced up when I entered, and something shifted in his expression. Concern, yes, but also hunger barely leashed. Can't sleep? His voice was rough, suggesting he'd been reading for hours. Bad dreams. I moved to the shelves lining his walls, running my fingers over book spines without really seeing them. I keep thinking about that day, about how stupid I was. You weren't stupid. The scrape of his chair, footsteps behind me. You were trusting. There's a difference. Is there? I turned to face him and found him closer than I expected, close enough to see the faint shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Trust without verification is just stupidity by another name. Then what do you call this? His hand rose, hovering near my face without touching. You're standing alone with me in the middle of the night. You've been in my home for weeks. You've let me feed you, shelter you, touch you. His fingers finally made contact, tracing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. Is that trust or stupidity? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know anything anymore. Yes, you do. His thumb brushed the corner of my mouth, and I felt the touch like lightning through my nervous system. You know I won't hurt you. You know I see you in ways Zach never did. You know, when you look at me like that, it takes every ounce of control I have not to. He cut himself off, jaw clenching, hand falling away. Not to what? The question escaped before I could stop it, reckless and wanting. Not to show you exactly how thoroughly you've undone me. His eyes blazed. Not to make you forget every touch that came before mine. Not to prove that you were always meant to be exactly where you are in my home, under my protection, close enough to ruin us both. The confession hung between us, raw and dangerous. I should have backed away, should have retreated to my safe, separate wing, should have maintained the boundaries that kept this situation from becoming catastrophically complicated. Instead, I stepped closer. I need to show you something, Yejun said abruptly, moving away with visible effort. He went to his desk, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a file folder thick with papers. I was going to wait, but you should know this now. He handed me the folder. I opened it, scanning the first document, and my breath stopped. It was a financial statement from the St. Jude Foundation for Arts Education. My scholarship, the one that had saved me from dropping out of Columbia, that had paid for my graduate studies, that had made my entire career possible. Except the St. Jude Foundation didn't exist. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. Transfers from a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, tuition payments made directly to Columbia's bursar, and monthly stipends that had continued long after I thought the grant-expired money Zach must have been intercepting, while I drowned in student debt that was just a lie to cover his theft. And at the bottom, a signature I now recognized. Kong Yejun. You, the word came out accusatory. You've been funding me for 10 years, he confirmed, watching me with hooded eyes. Since you were 22 and submitted your undergraduate thesis on Caravaggio's use of shadow. It was brilliant, fearless. I knew then what you could become. You've been stalking me for 10 years? Anger and something else, something that felt dangerously like gratitude warred in my chest. I've been investing in you. He moved closer, and this time I didn't back away. I've been waiting for you to reach your full potential. And then Zach Kent walked into your conservation lab, saw that same potential, and used it instead of nurturing it. Why? I demanded. Why would you do this? Invest in a stranger, wait years, watch me from the shadows. Yejun's hand rose to my face again, cupping my jaw, tilting my head back to meet his gaze. Because the first time I saw your work, it felt like recognition, like finding something I'd been missing without knowing it was gone. Because I built an empire on understanding value, and you, Gracie Leonard, are the most valuable thing I've ever encountered. I'm not a thing, I protested weakly, even as my body swayed into his touch. No. His thumb traced my lower lip with aching slowness. You're a force, a revelation, a masterpiece that Zach tried to forge into something less. But I see you, Gracie. I've always seen you. The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the Persian rug. Neither of us moved to pick them up. You're not my guardian angel, I whispered, torn between fury and something far more dangerous. You're the devil offering me everything I didn't know I wanted. Yes. His other hand found my waist, pulling me against him, and the contact was electric. But I'm your devil, Gracie. I've been yours since the moment I read your name on that thesis. And you've been mine since the moment you put your hand in mine at that altar. This is insane, I breathed, even as my hands found his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath my palms. Completely. His forehead dropped to mine, his breath mingling with my own. Tell me to leave. Tell me you need space. Tell me anything except what I see in your eyes right now. What do you see? I asked, knowing the answer, knowing that speaking it aloud would change everything. Want. The word was a growl. Fear, anger, and beneath it all, the same thing I've been fighting since the moment you walked into my study that first night. What's that? Desire. His hands tightened on me, pulling me closer. Raw. Undeniable. Mutual. He was right. God help me, he was right. Somewhere between the cathedral and the vault, between his revelations and his protection, between anger and gratitude, I'd stopped seeing him as just my captor or my savior. I'd started seeing him as a man, a devastatingly attractive, dangerously compelling man who looked at me like I was the most precious thing in his fortress of treasures. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, my voice breaking. I don't know how to want you when I should hate you. I don't know how to trust this when everything else was a lie. Then don't trust it, Yejun murmured, his lips hovering over mine, close enough that I felt every word. Trust me instead. Trust that I've waited 10 years. Trust that I won't rush you. Trust that when you finally come to me, and you will, Gracie, you will, it will be because you chose it, not because I demanded it. The promise in his voice made me shiver. He was offering patience, control. The one thing Zach had stolen from me, agency over my own desire. And if I'm never ready? I asked, echoing my question from weeks ago but meaning something different now. Yejun smiled against my lips, not quite kissing me but close enough to drive me mad. Then I'll spend the rest of my life in this exquisite torture, wanting you and waiting, because having you near but untouched is still better than the decade I spent watching you from the shadows. He pulled back then, releasing me even though I could see the cost of it in the tension of his shoulders, the clench of his jaw, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. Go to bed, Gracie. His voice was strained. Before I forget, I'm trying to be honorable. I fled, not because I was afraid of him, but because I was terrified of myself, of the part of me that wanted to close the distance between us, and see what would happen if I stopped running from this impossible attraction. But as I lay alone in my bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew the truth. Yejun wasn't my captor. He wasn't even really my savior. He was something far more dangerous. He was the one person who'd ever seen me completely and wanted me anyway, who'd invested in me before I could prove my worth, who'd waited years for me to become who I was meant to be. And that was the most seductive thing of all. Morning brought clarity of a different kind. I woke to find a note slipped under my door, Yejun's elegant script directing me to the conservatory. The mansion's glass and steel addition had been transformed overnight into something that stole my breath. A restoration lab, professional grade. Conservation tables positioned for optimal natural light. Microscopes and spectroscopy equipment that belonged in museum settings. Pigment libraries organized with obsessive precision. Climate controls calibrated to archival standards. Everything I'd ever needed in my cramped studio in Manhattan, multiplied tenfold. Use your rage. Yejun's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized the predatory elegance of his build. Paint with it. Restore with it. Let it make you sharper. Why? I moved to the conservation table, running my hands over its smooth surface. What do you want me to do? Find what we missed. He gestured to a painting covered with protective cloth in the corner. The last piece you restored for Zach. The one you finished 2 days before the wedding. My hands trembled as I pulled back the cloth. The painting was small, barely 2 feet square, a still life attributed to a minor Dutch master. Flowers in a glass vase, technically proficient but unremarkable. I'd spent 6 weeks on it, carefully removing the yellowed varnish and overpaint, stabilizing the canvas, retouching minor losses. Standard work, nothing extraordinary. What am I looking for? I asked, though my trained eye was already cataloging every brushstroke, every crack in the aged paint. Zach was obsessed with this piece. Yejun moved to stand beside me, close enough that his arm brushed mine. He called you 17 times during the restoration. He visited your studio 9 times more than any other piece. And 2 days after you finished it, he put it in a secure storage unit instead of delivering it to the buyer. Obsession. Zach had never been obsessive about the art itself, only about the money it represented. So why this piece? I positioned the painting under the microscope, examining the surface at high magnification. The varnish removal had been perfect. I could see that even now. The original pigments were vibrant, the brushwork confident. But there, in the lower right corner, something caught my attention. A pattern in the brushstrokes that seemed almost deliberate. Bring me the UV lamp, I murmured, too focused to register Yejun's immediate compliance. Under ultraviolet light, certain pigments fluoresced in distinctive ways. It was a standard authentication technique, but also, the pattern blazed under UV. Not random brushstrokes. Not the natural movement of an artist's hand. A code, written in cadmium yellow pigment that glowed brilliant green under black light. Oh my God. My hands flew over the keyboard of the spectroscopy computer, pulling up references. This isn't a restoration technique. This is mine. Explain. Yejun's voice was sharp, focused. In graduate school, I developed a method for invisible watermarking. The memory came rushing back my thesis. The breakthrough that had almost gotten me expelled for being too unconventional, using specific pigments that fluoresce under UV in patterns that can be read as binary code. It was theoretical, a way to prove authentication without damaging the work. I never actually implemented it because the art world thought it was too invasive, but you used it. It wasn't a question. No, I stopped, memory flooding back. Zach asked me about it. During our 2nd month together, he said it was brilliant, that I should write it up for publication. I told him the formula, showed him my notes. Betrayal cut fresh and deep. He gave me underpainting texture maps to follow for structural integrity. I thought I was applying a stabilizing grid. I was painting data. Show me the pattern, Yejun demanded, pulling out his phone. I photographed the UV illuminated section, my hands shaking with rage and realization. Yejun forwarded it to someone, his expression grim. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. The conversation was in Korean, rapid and intense. When he hung up, his eyes blazed with something between fury and triumph. It's a cryptocurrency wallet passkey, he said. 64-character hexadecimal string, encrypted in your brushstroke pattern. My tech team estimates Zach has been using this method to store access codes for offshore accounts. The implications crashed over me. Every painting I'd restored for the past 3 years potentially contained keys to Zach's stolen fortune. He'd turned my technique, my intellectual property, my innovation into his personal encryption system. How much? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. The wallet this particular key unlocks? Yejun's voice was deadly quiet. $23 million. The number didn't feel real. None of this felt real. I'd been living in poverty, eating ramen, worrying about student loans, while my ex-fiancé used my genius to hide a fortune that could have bought a small country. There's something else. Yejun's lieutenant, a lean, dangerous man named Min, entered the conservatory with a tablet. We found it in Zach's corporate documents. You need to see this. The document was an insurance policy. Key person life insurance. The kind companies took out on essential employees. It wasn't about the money, Gracie. The payout was just to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He wanted you erased, so you couldn't testify. The insured person was me. I read the clauses, my vision narrowing. The policy paid out only in specific circumstances: suicide, accidental death in custody, death resulting from violent assault. All situations that could plausibly occur to someone facing federal charges for art fraud. He was going to kill me. The words came out flat, emotionless, because the alternative was screaming. He wasn't just going to let me take the fall. He was going to make sure I didn't survive to defend myself. Yejun's hand found the small of my back, a grounding touch that kept me from shattering. This policy was filed 3 weeks before your wedding. He'd already hired someone. Who? I turned to face him, fury finally breaking through the shock. A contractor who specializes in making prison deaths look like suicides. Min's voice was clinical. We intercepted the payment. The hit was scheduled for your 3rd day in federal custody. 3 days. 72 hours was all I'd had before Zach's plan turned lethal. And Yejun had saved me without my even knowing I needed saving. How did you know? I demanded, something between gratitude and anger making my voice shake. How did you find this? Because I've been watching you for a decade, Gracie. Yejun turned me to face him fully, his hands framing my face with devastating gentleness. Because I know every financial move Zach made, every shell company he created, every document he filed. Because the moment he took out that policy, I knew exactly what he was planning. You knew he was going to kill me, and you waited until the wedding? The accusation hung between us. I knew I had to get you away from him in a way that would stand up to legal scrutiny, Yejun corrected, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones. I needed the marriage to be real, binding, unbreakable. I needed to create a situation where you were legally under my protection before the FBI could take you into custody. And yes, I cut it close. Too close. But you're here. You're safe. And Zach's hired killer is in a shipping container bound for Jakarta. I should have been horrified by the casual violence implied in that last statement. Instead, I felt a savage satisfaction that terrified me with its intensity. So what now? I asked, forcing myself to focus on the practical, instead of the way his hands on my face made my skin burn. We have proof of the encryption method, proof of the insurance policy. What do we do with it? We lure him out. Yejun's smile was predatory. We activate the key. How? There's a private auction in Seoul next week. Major collectors. Underground market. No questions asked. The painting that contains his largest wallet key is being sold legitimately, through my acquisition firm. His eyes gleamed. You'll authenticate it. Live. On stage. In front of witnesses, including several people who work for Zach's Middle Eastern buyer. He'll be there. I realized. He won't be able to resist. The moment you authenticate that painting and describe your breakthrough watermarking technique, he'll know we've cracked his code. He'll have to move his money immediately. Yejun's hand slid from my face to my shoulders. And my team will be waiting to trace every transaction. It was elegant. Brutal. Exactly the kind of plan that appealed to the part of me that wanted to watch Zach burn. When do we leave? I asked. 3 days. His hands tightened on my shoulders. Gracie, this will be dangerous. Zach is desperate. Desperate men do reckless things. Good. I met his dark gaze with newfound steel. Let him be reckless. Let him make mistakes. Because I'm done being his victim. Yejun studied me for a long moment, and I saw approval in his expression, along with something darker. Something possessive and hungry that made my breath catch. There's one more thing, he said quietly. When we go to Seoul, we'll be presenting as a married couple. Unified front. He needs to believe we're unshakable. I can do that, I said, more confidently than I felt. Can you? His hand rose to cut my jaw, tilting my face up. Can you stand beside me in front of hundreds of people and make them believe you chose this? Chose me? The question held layers of meaning. Was he asking about the mission? Or something more personal? I did choose this, I said slowly, surprising myself with the truth of it. Maybe not at first. Maybe not in that cathedral when I had 3 seconds to decide, but every day since, every moment I could have run or called for help or betrayed you, I chose to stay. I chose to trust you. I stopped, the words too dangerous to speak. Say it, Yejun demanded, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. Finish that thought. I chose you, I breathed. I don't know when it happened. I don't know if it's Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding or just pure insanity. But somewhere between the vault and the study, between your confessions and your patience, I stopped pretending this was just survival strategy. I chose you, Yejun. God help me. His control shattered. One moment we were standing apart. The next, his mouth was on mine, claiming, consuming, turning every cell in my body to liquid fire. His hands tangled in my curls, angling my head for deeper access, and I opened for him with a moan that would have embarrassed me if I wasn't too far gone to care. The kiss was everything I'd been denying myself, desperate, angry, laced with weeks of tension and wanting. His tongue swept against mine, and I tasted dark promises. Patient hunger finally unleashed. My hands found his hair, his neck, his shoulders, needing to touch, to confirm he was real, that this was happening. He lifted me onto the conservation table, stepping between my thighs, and the position was so intimate, so claiming, that I gasped against his mouth. He swallowed the sound, one hand sliding to the small of my back, while the other cradled my head with devastating tenderness that contrasted beautifully with the rough hunger of his kiss. Gracie. My name was a prayer and a curse. He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, his pupils blown wide, his breathing ragged. If we don't stop now, don't stop, I said recklessly, pulling him back to me. Don't you dare stop. His laugh was dark and full of promise. Not here, not like this. When I have you, and I will have you. Make no mistake, it won't be on a conservation table in broad daylight where anyone could walk in. The words sent heat pooling low in my belly. Then where? My bed. His mouth found the pulse point at my throat, and I felt his smile against my skin. Where I can take my time. Where I can worship you the way I've imagined for 10 years. Where the only sound is your pleasure, and the only name on your lips is mine. I shuddered, desire and anticipation warring with residual fear. I haven't not since Zach. I know. He lifted his head, meeting my eyes with fierce certainty. And when you're ready, we'll burn every memory of his touch away until you can't remember any hands but mine. The promise in his voice made me tremble. He stepped back, releasing me with visible effort, and I mourned the loss of his heat. Soul, he said, his voice rough. After Soul, when Zach is finished and you're free, ask me again. Ask you what? His smile was pure sin. To show you exactly what it means to be mine. He left me there, trembling and wanting, surrounded by art and possibility. And I knew with crystal clarity that everything was about to change. Soul was calling, vengeance was coming, and afterward, in the ruins of my old life, I would choose to step into the new one, not as collateral, not as victim, but as the Queen Kong Yejun had always seen when he looked at me. The private jet cut through darkness like a blade through silk, Soul glittering beneath us like scattered diamonds on black velvet. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching the city materialize, a sprawling creature of light and shadow that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. You're thinking too much. Yejun's voice came from across the cabin, low and intimate despite the space between us. He sat in shadow, only the amber glow of his scotch catching light. I can hear it from here. I'm thinking the appropriate amount for someone about to publicly authenticate stolen art in front of international criminals, I said, not turning from the window. My reflection ghosted over the cityscape below a woman in travel clothes who looked nothing like the terrified bride from 3 months ago. In the months since that cathedral, weeks of investigations, international travel, and carefully staged traps, I had learned how to weaponize patience. You're thinking about the kiss. My breath fogged the glass. He was right, damn him. I'd been replaying that moment in the conservatory on an endless loop. The taste of him, the way his control had shattered, the dark promise in his voice when he'd told me to ask him again after Soul. Arrogant, I murmured, finally turning to face him. His smile was a slash of white in the darkness. Accurate. The jet began its descent, and with it, the last of my hesitation fell away. This wasn't about fear anymore. This was about power mine, finally, to wield. The hotel suite overlooked the Han River, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist luxury that screamed old money. Yejun's team had transformed the sitting room into a command center. Laptops, surveillance feeds, the organized chaos of a military operation disguised as a business trip. Min briefed us while I unpacked. The auction is invitation only. 300 guests, mostly legitimate collectors with a dozen black market buyers scattered in the mix. Zach's proxy will be there, a Korean-American art dealer named David Chang, who's been laundering pieces through Singapore. Security? Yejun asked, shrugging out of his jacket. The movement revealed the holster at his ribs. a reminder that this wasn't a game, heavy but manageable. The venue is neutral ground, the Jiangcheng family's territory. They've guaranteed safe passage for all attendees. Min's expression suggested he trusted that guarantee about as much as I trusted Zach's love letters. Then we'll have our own insurance. Yejun's gaze found mine across the room. Gracie authenticates on stage. The moment she confirms the piece and mentions her watermarking technique, Chang will alert Zach. Zach will panic and try to move the money. We'll be waiting. And if he doesn't take the bait? I asked. Unpacking the black dress, Yejun had selected a piece of strategic armor disguised as fashion. Then we moved to contingency. Yejun dismissed his team with a gesture, waiting until we were alone before continuing. But he'll take it. His ego won't let him walk away from the money, and his fear won't let him trust that we don't know more than we're showing. He moved to the window, scotch in hand, silhouetted against Seoul's electric night. For just a moment, the mask slipped not fear, but something closer to awe, like he was standing at the edge of something he didn't know how to survive. The tattoo at his neck was visible above his collar, the dragon's tail curling upward, a brand of belonging to something older and more dangerous than I fully understood. You should rest, he said without turning. Tomorrow will be long. Will you? I found myself asking, crossing to stand beside him. The city sprawled below us, endless and unknowable. No. His reflection in the glass met mine. I'll be watching the surveillance feeds, running scenarios, preparing for every variable. Control freak, is there another way to keep you alive? The question held weight beyond its words, an admission of something he hadn't quite said aloud. I turned to face him, close enough now that I could smell the cedar of his cologne mixing with the scotch. Is that what this is about? Keeping me alive? It's about keeping you. His hand rose, not quite touching my face but hovering there. A question written in the space between us. Everything else is just the method. The confession hung in the air, raw and unadorned. I should have stepped back. We should have maintained the distance that kept this professional, strategic. Instead, I leaned into his almost touch, my cheek finding his palm. After Seoul, I whispered, echoing his earlier promise. Ask me again after Seoul. His fingers curled against my skin, a tremor of restraint. Go to bed, Gracie. Before I forget, we have a war to win tomorrow. I went, but I felt his gaze tracking my retreat, heavy as a physical touch. The Shinsege gallery at night was a temple to wealth and shadow. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across marble floors, illuminating faces I recognized from Interpol watch lists and Forbes magazines in equal measure. I stood in the preparation room, staring at my reflection in a full-length mirror, and barely recognized the woman looking back. The dress was black silk that moved like water, cut to suggest rather than reveal, with a neckline that framed the hollow of my throat where my pulse fluttered visibly. My curls were swept into an elaborate updo that exposed the length of my neck. Diamond earrings borrowed from Yejun's collection caught the light like stars. You look like vengeance, Hana said softly, adjusting the fall of the dress at my hips. Beautiful and terrible. Good. I turned from the mirror, reaching for the small clutch that held my notes and the microscope images. That's exactly what I'm going for. Yejun entered without knocking, and the air pressure in the room shifted. He wore a tuxedo that transformed him from dangerous to devastating, every line cut to emphasize the predatory elegance of his build. But it was his eyes that made my breath catch dark, consuming, tracking every detail of my appearance with an intensity that felt like being marked. Ready? His voice was rougher than usual, and I knew he was seeing not just the dress but what it represented, my choice to stand beside him, to weaponize my appearance the way he weaponized everything else. Ready, I confirmed, accepting the arm he offered. The gallery buzzed with controlled energy, the kind of barely leashed hunger that came with proximity to rare beauty and rarer opportunity. Yejun guided me through the crowd, his hand at the small of my back, a brand of possession that turned heads and whispered questions in our wake. I caught sight of David Chang near the bar, mid-40s, expensively dressed, with the careful neutrality of a man who made his living in gray spaces. His eyes tracked us across the room, calculating, assessing threat levels. He's seen you, I murmured against Yejun's shoulder, the gesture appearing intimate to observers while allowing me to speak without being overheard. Good. Let him report back. Let Zach know exactly what he's facing. Yejun's hand splayed wider at my back, fingers pressing through silk to skin. You're not his victim anymore. You're my queen, The possessive pride in his voice made heat pool low in my stomach, dangerous and intoxicating. The auction began with lesser pieces testing the room's appetite, building tension. I stood backstage with the painting that would change everything. My heart a steady drumbeat of anticipation rather than fear. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see the crowd, see Chang's position near the exit, see Yejun's men positioned at strategic points throughout the space. Miss Leonard. The auction house director appeared at my elbow, nervousness evident in his precise movements. You're on in 2 minutes. Remember, keep your authentication brief but thorough. These buyers are sophisticated, they'll know if you're hedging. I know exactly what they need to hear, I assured him, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. The stage lights were blinding, turning the audience into a sea of shadows punctuated by the gleam of jewelry and the red dots of recording devices. I positioned the painting on the easel, adjusted the lighting to showcase the brushwork, and felt the room lean forward with collective hunger. Good evening. My voice carried through the space, amplified and strangely powerful. I'm Dr. Grace Leonard, and I've been asked to authenticate this piece attributed to the Dutch Golden Age master Hendrik ter Brugghen. I began with the technical details, pigment analysis, canvas composition, the telltale signs of 17th century craftsmanship. The audience was rapt, but I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to one man, watching through Chang's phone, thousands of miles away. However, I continued, letting a small smile curve my lips. What makes this piece truly unique is a revolutionary authentication method I developed during my graduate research. I gestured to the microscope images projected behind me. Using specific fluorescent pigments visible only under UV light, I created a watermarking system that allows restorers to sign their work invisibly. The room erupted in murmurs. Chang's hand went to his phone. This particular piece bears my signature technique, a pattern that can be read as a 64-character hexadecimal string. I met Chang's eyes across the darkened gallery. Some might call it a key. I call it insurance that my work can never be falsely attributed. Chang was already moving toward the exit, phone pressed to his ear. Yejun's men didn't stop him, this was exactly what we wanted. I finished the authentication, confirmed the piece's provenance, and descended from the stage to thunderous applause. But I was tracking Chang's retreat, watching the dominoes begin to fall. Yejun materialized at my side, his hand finding mine with proprietary ease. Brilliant, he murmured against my ear, the praise sending shivers down my spine. He took the bait. Now what? I asked. Even as Min appeared with a tablet showing financial transactions lighting up like fireworks. Zach's accounts draining in real time as he tried to move his money ahead of what he believed was our imminent discovery. Now we hunt. Yejun's smile was predatory. Chang is heading to a private room in the back. He thinks he's alerting his employer. Instead, he's leading us exactly where we need to go. We moved through the gallery with the casual elegance of guests enjoying the evening. But I felt the coiled tension in Yejun's body, the predator beneath the tuxedo preparing to strike. His security team formed a loose perimeter around us, invisible to the uninitiated but obvious to anyone trained to look. The private rooms in the back of the gallery were designed for discreet negotiations, soundproofed, unmarked, accessible only to VIP buyers. Min had already disabled the locks, giving us access while making it look like a malfunction. We could hear Chang's voice through the door, rapid Korean, punctuated by English phrases. She knows about the cipher. The accounts are compromised. Need extraction protocol. Yejun's hand settled at my waist, pulling me close as we listened. His mouth found my ear, breath hot against my skin. When we go in, stay behind me. He's desperate, which makes him dangerous. I'm not afraid, I whispered back, surprised to find it true. I know. That's what terrifies me. His lips brushed my temple, the gesture too brief to be a kiss, but intimate enough to make my pulse spike. Ready? He didn't wait for my answer. The door slammed open, Yejun's presence filling the space with lethal authority. Chang spun, phone clattering to the marble floor, his hand moving toward what I assumed was a weapon. I wouldn't. Min appeared behind Chang, pressing something small and hard against the art dealer's spine. Mr. Kong would like a word. Chang's face went through a remarkable series of expressions. Confusion, recognition, fear, calculation. You can't do this here. The Jiangcheng family guaranteed safe passage. For legitimate business, Yejun interrupted, his voice conversational despite the violence coiled in his frame. Conspiring to defraud one of the evening's featured guests doesn't fall under that protection. I don't know what you're talking about. Chang's English was flawless, his denial automatic. Lie better. I stepped out from behind Yejun, letting Chang see me fully, the woman whose technique he'd just watched explained on stage, whose genius had been weaponized without her knowledge. We know about Zach. We know about Singapore. We know about the crypto wallets. Chang's face paled. She knows? She's not the fool you and Zach assumed. Yejun's hand found my back again, that possessive touch that was becoming familiar. She's the architect of your entire operation, and she's about to dismantle it piece by piece. Zach will disappear. Chang's bravado was crumbling. He's already activated the dead man switches. No, he hasn't. Min held up the tablet, showing accounts with 0 balances. Because we've been draining his wallets for the past 15 minutes. Every transaction he's attempting is being rerouted through shell companies that terminate in frozen assets. By morning, Zachary Kent will have nothing but the clothes he's wearing and the enemies he's made. The fight went out of Chang like air from a punctured balloon. What do you want? His location. Yejun's voice dropped to something dangerous. Where he's hiding, who he's with, every contingency plan he's shared with you. And if I tell you? Chang's eyes darted between us, calculating odds. Then you get to keep the gallery job, the apartment in Gangnam, and the offshore account we know you've been skimming from Zach's operations. Yejun smiled, and it was terrifying in its civility. Refuse, and you get to explain to the Jang Chung family why their neutrality was compromised by your presence here tonight. It wasn't really a choice, and we all knew it. Chang talked. He talked for 20 minutes, spilling details about Zach's network, his backup plans, his paranoid security measures, and with every word, I felt the noose tightening around my ex-fiancé's throat. When we emerged from the private room, the auction was still in full swing, none of the other guests aware of the small war that had just been won in the back corridors. Yejun guided me toward the exit, his hand never leaving my back, his presence a bulwark against the chaos of my own emotions. The limousine was waiting, black and anonymous in Seoul's neon night. We slid into the leather interior, and the door closed with a solid thunk that sealed us away from the world. You did it, Yejun said, turning to face me in the dim interior. City lights played across his features, transforming him into something mythic, half shadow, half flame. You destroyed him without firing a shot. We did it, I corrected, but the victory felt hollow. He's still out there. Not for long. His hand found mine in the darkness between us, fingers threading through mine with devastating intimacy. Chang confirmed Zach's in Jakarta. My team is already moving. I want to be there. The words surprised me, but I meant them. When you find him, I want to watch him realize exactly what he lost. Yejun studied me in the flickering light, and something shifted in his expression, approval mixed with concern, desire tangled with caution. It won't be pretty, Gracie. What happens when we find him will be exactly what he deserves, I finished, leaning closer. We were inches apart now, sharing breath, sharing heat. You promised me after Seoul I could ask again. Seoul isn't over yet, he said. But his thumb was tracing circles on my palm, belying his words. Close enough. I closed the distance, my mouth finding his with all the pent-up hunger of 3 months of waiting, wanting, denying. The kiss was different from the one in the conservatory, less desperate, more certain, a claiming that went both ways. His hands came up to frame my face, angling my head for deeper access, and I opened for him with a sound that would have embarrassed me if I wasn't too far gone to care. He tasted like scotch and dark promises, like power and patience finally rewarded. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against mine. Gracie, my name was a prayer and a warning. If we do this? No more warnings, I interrupted, my hands fisting in his shirt. No more waiting. No more maybe. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. His laugh was dark and full of relief. Then we do this, right? He pressed one more kiss to my lips, tender and devastating. After Jakarta, after Zach, after you've had your vengeance, and we can start something that isn't built on survival strategy. The frustration was acute, but I understood what he was offering, not just consummation, but courtship. Not just possession, but partnership. Promise me, I demanded, pulling back to meet his eyes. I promise. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me across the seat until I was nearly in his lap, his breath hot against my ear. I promise that when I finally have you, it will be worth every second of waiting. I promise I'll make you forget every touch that came before mine. I promise." His teeth grazed my earlobe, and I shivered. "That you'll never doubt again who you belong to." The limousine pulled up to the hotel, reality intruding on our dark sanctuary. But as Yejun helped me out, his hand possessive at the small of my back, I felt the weight of his promises settling over me like a cloak. Jakarta was calling. Vengeance was coming. And after, there would be no more barriers between what we were and what we could become. The flight to Jakarta was longer than Seoul, and I spent it in a state of anticipatory tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man across the cabin who kept looking at me like I was a problem he was trying to solve and a prize he'd already won. "Stop," I said finally, not looking up from the financial documents I was pretending to review. "Stop what?" His voice held barely concealed amusement. "Looking at me like that. Like what?" "Like you're mentally cataloging every way you're going to make good on those promises." Heat crept up my neck as I finally met his gaze. He was sprawled in his seat with leonine grace, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms I'd spent too much time studying, a smile playing at his lips that promised sin. "I'm not mentally cataloging." His smile widened. "I'm mentally prioritizing." The heat in my cheeks intensified. "Yejun, say it again." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and suddenly the space between us felt charged. "Say my name like that, half prayer, half warning. It makes me want to show you exactly why you should be warning me. We're supposed to be focused on finding Zach." I tried, but my voice lacked conviction. "I can multitask." He stood, crossing to my seat with predatory intention. His hand found the armrest beside my head, caging me in. "I can plan to destroy your ex-fiancé, while simultaneously imagining what you'll sound like when you stop saying my name as a warning and start saying it as a plea." My breath caught. This version of Yejun, playful, hungry, unrestrained by the careful control he usually maintained, was devastating. "You're supposed to be a terrifying mafia boss." "I am a terrifying mafia boss." His free hand traced the line of my jaw, thumb brushing my lower lip. "I'm just also a man who's been waiting a decade for you to look at me the way you're looking at me right now." "And how am I looking at you?" I whispered. "Like you might devour me first." His smile was wicked. "I'm very much in favor of that particular race." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing our descent into Jakarta, and Yejun pulled back with visible reluctance, but the promise in his eyes as he returned to his seat made it clear this was a postponement, not a cancellation. Jakarta hit like a wall of humid heat the moment we stepped off the plane. The private terminal offered some respite, but nothing could entirely escape the oppressive weight of tropical air and urban density. Yejun's local contact, an Indonesian woman named Sari with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, briefed us during the drive to the safe house. Zach's holed up in a residential complex in Kemang expat area. Easy to blend in, lots of Western faces. Sari navigated Jakarta's chaotic traffic with the ease of long practice. He's been moving money through local exchanges, trying to cash out what he thinks you haven't frozen yet. "How long until he realizes it's all gone?" I asked from the back seat, pressed against Yejun's side in the cramped sedan. "He already knows." Sari's smile was vicious. His last transaction attempt was declined 4 hours ago. Since then, he's been making increasingly desperate phone calls. "To who?" Yejun's arm tightened around my shoulders, a protective gesture that had become reflexive. "Everyone. His sister, his mother, old college roommates. Anyone who might wire him money for a plane ticket." Sari pulled into an underground garage beneath a nondescript apartment building. "He's trapped, broke, and starting to panic." The safe house was utilitarian surveillance equipment, secure communications, enough weapons to stage a small coup. Min was already there, coordinating with local assets, his expression grim when he saw us enter. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "The FBI picked him up an hour ago." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "What?" Interpol red notice came through. Indonesian police grabbed him at a currency exchange in Menteng. Min pulled up footage on one of the monitors, grainy CCTV showing Zach in handcuffs, looking smaller and more pathetic than I remembered. "They're holding him at the embassy pending extradition." "Then we've lost him," I said, despair creeping into my voice. "The moment he's back in U.S. custody." "He's already made a deal," Min interrupted, turned state's witness. "He's claiming you and Yejun conspired to frame him, that you're the real masterminds behind the forgery ring." The rage was instant and consuming. He's doing it again, making me the villain while he plays victim. Not quite. Yejun's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded violence. This time he's implicating both of us, which means he's desperate enough to believe the FBI will protect him from me. Will they? I turned to face him, needing to see his eyes. Not even a little bit. His smile was cold. But it doesn't matter. He won't make it to testimony. The promise in those words should have terrified me. Instead, I felt savage satisfaction. There's more, Min said reluctantly. Your sister is with him. The world tilted. What? She's been in Jakarta the whole time. The FBI is offering her immunity in exchange for corroboration of Zach's story. Min showed me another image, my sister, visibly pregnant now, standing beside federal agents. They think they have enough to indict you both. I stared at the image of the sister I'd once loved, now carrying the child of the man who'd tried to destroy me, and felt something fundamental break inside me. Not heartbreak that required some remaining attachment. This was colder, cleaner, the final severing of a bond that had been fraying for years. I need to see them, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Gracie, Yejun started, concern evident. I need to see them, I repeated, meeting his eyes. I need to look them both in the face and watch them lie to federal agents about me. I need that closure. He studied me for a long moment, reading depths I wasn't sure I wanted exposed. Finally, he nodded. Then we arrange a deposition. You, Zach, your sister, federal prosecutors. Everything recorded. Everything official. They'll destroy her, Min warned. Zach's lawyers are ruthless. Good, I said, and meant it. Let them try. The U.S. Embassy's conference room was designed to be intimidating, all polished wood and government seals, with cameras recording from multiple angles. I sat across from Zach for the first time since the cathedral, and the reality of him was almost laughable compared to the monster I'd built in my mind. He'd lost weight. His expensively tailored clothes hung wrong now, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting paranoia. When his gaze met mine, I saw fear flicker across his features before he masked it with bravado. Gracie. He tried for warmth, for the charm that had once worked on me. I'm so glad you're safe. When I heard Yejun had taken you, save it. I cut him off, my voice arctic. We're not doing this. We're not pretending you're concerned for my welfare. The federal prosecutor, a severe woman named Claire, leaned forward. Miss Leonard, we have testimony from Mr. Kent that you were the primary forger in his operation, that you deliberately created fake provenance documents and sold them to unsuspecting collectors. Do you? I pulled out my tablet, queuing up files I'd spent weeks preparing. Because I have something better than testimony. I have proof. For the next hour, I systematically dismantled Zach's narrative. I presented the technical analysis of the paintings, showing how the restoration techniques used were beyond Zach's skill level and knowledge base. I provided emails where Zach had specifically requested I use certain cleaning methods without explaining why. I showed financial records proving every major purchase of art supplies coincided with Zach receiving a new piece to authenticate. But the killing blow was the chemistry. The pigments used in the forgeries contain a synthetic binding medium that wasn't commercially available until 2019, I explained, pulling up spectroscopic analysis. Zach's operation claims these pieces were created between 2016 and 2018. Either the forger was a time traveler, or someone is lying about the timeline. This could have been faked, Claire argued, but her conviction was wavering. By who? The same woman who supposedly couldn't tell a real Caravaggio from a follower's work? I leaned forward, letting them see the steel that 3 months with Yejun had forged. You can't have it both ways. Either I'm a genius forger who somehow forgot basic chronology, or I'm exactly what I claim to be, an art historian who was weaponized by a con artist. Zach's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. I watched my ex-fiancé's face cycle through desperation, anger, and finally, calculation. What about the life insurance policy? Zach blurted out, his lawyer's hand on his arm too late to stop him. Explain that, Gracie. Explain why you took out a $10 million policy on yourself and named my company as beneficiary. The room went silent. Claire's eyes sharpened with interest. I didn't, I said calmly, having anticipated this move. You did. Using a forged signature and stolen biometric data from the conservation lab where I worked. I pulled up another document. Here's the signature analysis, comparing the insurance application to known samples of my handwriting. The pressure patterns are wrong. The letter formation is inconsistent. And most damningly, I zoomed in on the signature line. The date stamp shows it was signed while I was giving a lecture at Columbia, a lecture with over 200 witnesses and security camera footage. Zach's face went gray. His lawyer stood abruptly. "We need a recess." "You need a new client," I corrected, gathering my materials. "Because this one just committed perjury." Chen held up a hand. "Miss Leonard, please sit. We're not done." "Actually, we are." Yejun's voice came from the doorway. He'd been observing from the adjacent room, and now he entered with the casual authority of someone who owned the space simply by occupying it. "My wife has cooperated fully with your investigation. She's provided documentation that exonerates her and implicates Mr. Kent in multiple felonies. Unless you're prepared to charge her with something specific, this deposition is over." "Mr. Kong," Claire started. "Dr. Kong," Yejun corrected smoothly. "I have a doctorate in art history from Seoul National University. I'd appreciate the proper title." He moved to stand behind my chair, his hand settling on my shoulder in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "Now, are we done here?" Chen looked between us, clearly frustrated but lacking ammunition. "For now, but don't leave Jakarta." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said sweetly, standing. "I'm rather enjoying watching justice catch up to people who underestimated me." We were almost to the door when my sister's voice stopped me. "Gracie, wait." I turned slowly. She stood in the doorway of an adjacent conference room, one hand on her swollen belly, her face a study in false remorse. "I'm sorry," she said, and she almost sounded like she meant it. "I never meant for things to go this far. Zach said you wouldn't be hurt, that you'd just be inconvenienced." "Inconvenienced?" The word tasted like acid. "You helped frame me for fraud. You slept with my fiancé. You're carrying his child. And you call that an inconvenience?" "I love him," she said, as if that explained everything. "You never really did. You loved your art more. I wanted something that was mine, not the scraps you left behind." The psychology of it was almost fascinating in its selfishness. She'd rewritten our entire history to justify her betrayal, turned my dedication to my career into neglect of her, transformed her conscious choices into inevitable consequences of my failures. "You're right," I said, and watched surprise flicker across her face. "I didn't love him. I loved the idea of him, the partnership, the respect for my work, the future we were building. But I never loved him the way you apparently do." I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. "So you can have him. You can have the broke, desperate, soon-to-be incarcerated father of your child. You can have the man who was willing to have me killed for insurance money. You can have all of it." "Gracie, I'm done." I turned away, dismissing her as thoroughly as she'd once dismissed my trust. "Enjoy your prize. I hope he's worth what you paid for him." Yejun's hand found the small of my back as we walked away, guiding me through corridors that blurred with unshed tears I refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Not when I'd just won. The embassy's back exit led to a covered garage where Sari waited with the car. We slid into the back seat, and only when the door closed and the outside world disappeared did I finally let the tremors start. "You destroyed him," Yejun said quietly, pulling me against his chest. "You walked into that room and systematically dismantled every lie he built. You were magnificent. Then why do I feel like this?" My voice cracked despite my best efforts. "Because you're human." His hand stroked through my curls, the gesture soothing. "Because you can be strong enough to face your betrayers and still feel the wound when you're safe enough to acknowledge it. I hate that she's pregnant," I admitted into his shirt. "I hate that some part of me still cares that she's about to tie herself to a monster. That's not weakness. That's proof you're better than they are." He tilted my face up, his thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. "You offered her closure and walked away. She'll spend the rest of her life wondering if you were right." "What happens now?" I asked, needing the tactical focus to override the emotional spiral. "Now the FBI's case against you collapses. Zach's deal is worthless, without your sister's corroboration, and her immunity hinges on providing testimony that supports his version of events." Yejun's smile was grim. "Without that, they're both exposed to the full weight of federal prosecution. And us? We go home." His hand cupped my face with devastating gentleness. "We return to New York, and we start living instead of surviving. After Jakarta," I reminded him, my voice steadier now. You promised after Jakarta. His eyes darkened with heat that made my breath catch. I did. And I keep my promises. His thumb traced my lower lip. But first we end this properly. We make sure Zach understands exactly what he lost and what it's going to cost him. The car wound through Jakarta's traffic toward the safe house. But I barely noticed the journey. I was too focused on the man beside me, on the weight of his promises, on the future that was finally, impossibly, within reach. Jakarta might not be over yet, but Seoul's promise was getting closer with every mile. We returned to New York on a red-eye that felt more like a victory parade than a retreat. Nearly 12 weeks had passed since the wedding time measured not in days, but in threats survived. The FBI had released me from their investigation not officially, but with the kind of quiet withdrawal that suggested they knew they'd been played. Zach remained in custody, his deal worthless, his future measured in decades rather than years. My sister had vanished into witness protection, pregnant and tied to a sinking ship. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt unmoored, as if the rage that had sustained me for 3 months had burned away and left me hollow. "You're thinking too loud again," Yejun murmured from the seat beside me. We had the first-class cabin to ourselves, his security team maintaining a discreet perimeter several rows back. "I'm thinking at an appropriate volume," I countered, but there was no heat in it. "You're wondering what comes next." He turned to face me fully, his hand finding mine in the darkness between us. "Now that the war is over, you're wondering if we were only held together by mutual enemies." The accuracy of his observation stole my breath. Mind reader, student. His thumb traced patterns on my palm that made concentration difficult. "I've spent 10 years learning to read you, Gracie. Your tells, your patterns, the way you retreat into academic language when you're feeling emotional. I don't." I started to protest, but he raised an eyebrow, and I heard myself. "Fine, maybe I do that." The answer is no. His other hand came up to cup my face, turning me to meet his gaze. We weren't held together by Zach. We were held together by recognition, the kind that happens once in a lifetime if you're lucky. The kind where you see someone and know, instantly and irrevocably, that they're going to matter. "You felt that 10 years ago?" I asked, needing to understand. "I felt that the first time I saw your work. When I actually saw you in person at a gallery opening 3 years before Zach. I knew I was in trouble." His smile was rueful. "I also knew you'd never look at me, never see past what I am to who I could be for you. So I waited. I invested. I hoped that someday, circumstances would align." "That's insane," I whispered. "Completely." He leaned closer, his forehead touching mine. "But so is marrying a stranger to save her from federal prison. So is letting her live in your home without touching her for 3 months. So is falling in love with a woman who's been watching you like you might devour her first, and being desperately hopeful she wins that particular race." The confession hung between us, raw and terrifying and perfect. "Yejun," his name came out broken. "Say it," he demanded, the words echoing his challenge from Seoul. "Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me the past 3 months weren't just survival strategy for you either. You're not alone." The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. "You're not alone, and I'm terrified. And I don't know how to do this when everything in my life has been lies and betrayals. But I want to try. I stopped, the words too enormous. "Say it," he commanded again, his voice rough. "I want you." It came out barely audible. "I want whatever this is between us. I want to stop running from it and see where it leads." His kiss was answer and celebration and promise all at once. Different from Jakarta's heat or Seoul's hunger, this was claiming with tenderness, possession with permission. His hands framed my face like I was something precious and dangerous all at once, and I opened for him with a sound that definitely should have embarrassed me. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his smile was pure triumph. "Mine," he said simply. "Yours," I agreed, and felt the truth of it settle into my bones. The plane touched down at Teterboro just after dawn, and exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. Yejun guided me through the private terminal and into the waiting car, his arm around my waist the only thing keeping me vertical. "Sleep," he murmured as we settled into the back seat. "I'll wake you when we're home." Home. The mansion. Except somewhere during 3 months of living there, it had stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling like exactly that home. I must have dozed because I woke to the car stopping and Yejun's hand on my shoulder. "Gracie, we're here." I blinked awake, expecting to see the familiar gates of the estate. Instead, we were still blocks away, and Min was standing beside the car with an expression that made my blood run cold. "Problem," he said tersely. "The estate's compromised. Armed response detected penetration of the south perimeter 15 minutes ago." The exhaustion vanished, replaced by adrenaline-sharp clarity. "Zach?" I asked, though I knew it was impossible. He was in federal custody in Jakarta. "Someone Zach hired before we took him down." Yejun's voice was deadly calm as he checked his phone, pulling up security feeds. He sent the kill order from a burner phone in the Jakarta currency exchange, 3 minutes before the police grabbed him. They've been prepping the assault for 24 hours. "How many?" I watched the feeds over his shoulder, figures in tactical gear moving through the gardens with military precision. 8 confirmed. Possibly more. Min was already coordinating with the security team. "They're looking for something specific. They've bypassed the main house and are heading for the east wing. My wing. My rooms. They're looking for me," I realized. "No." Yejun's hand found mine, squeezing with barely controlled violence. "They're looking for the documentation you kept. The proof of Zach's crimes. He must have thought you'd bring physical copies back with you." "I did," I admitted. "Backups of everything in the safe in my study." Yejun's jaw clenched. "Then we need to get you far from here." "No." I surprised myself with the firmness. "That safe has biometric locks. They can't access it without me. If we run, they'll just wait us out, and eventually breach it." "Gracie." "Your home," I interrupted, meeting his eyes. "You're asking me to let them destroy your home because it's safer to run? That's not who you are. And it's not who I am anymore." Something shifted in his expression, pride mixed with exasperation. "You're suggesting we engage 8 trained mercenaries because you've decided to stop running? I'm suggesting we end this." I turned to Min. "What's our tactical advantage?" Min looked between us, clearly torn between professional protocol and respect for my agency. Yejun gave him a slight nod. "We know the estate better than they do," Min said. "And we have remote access to all security systems, locks, lights, climate controls." An idea crystallized, wild and dangerous, and exactly the kind of plan Yejun would appreciate. "The East Wing Gallery. It's climate-controlled for the art, right? Independent HVAC system?" "Yes," Yejun said slowly, seeing where I was going. "And the windows are reinforced to protect against UV damage and potential theft?" I was thinking out loud now, puzzle pieces clicking into place. "Bulletproof glass, seismically resistant frames." Min's expression shifted to something like approval. "You want to trap them? I want to use the house itself as a weapon." I met Yejun's gaze. "You taught me to understand my value, to wield my strengths instead of hiding them. My strength is knowing how to protect art. Those mercenaries are just another threat to preservation." Yejun's laugh was dark and full of pride. "You're suggesting we use museum-grade security systems as a tactical advantage. I'm suggesting we show them what happens when they threaten things you've protected for a decade." I pulled up the estate blueprints on my phone, the ones I'd studied during weeks of insomnia. "Can we access the gallery's environmental controls remotely?" "Yes, but..." Min stopped as understanding dawned. "You want to create a hypoxic environment. Museums use oxygen deprivation to control pests and preserve organic materials," I explained, warming to the plan. "Lower the oxygen content in that wing below 15%. Museum-grade preservation systems disrupt barometric zones. Standard rebreathers don't compensate fast enough. And they'll have less than 2 minutes before they're unconscious." "That's insane," Yejun said. "That's strategic." I met his eyes. "And it's non-lethal. They'll wake up with headaches and zip ties, not body bags. You've been spending too much time with me." But he was already coordinating with his security team, deploying them to secure the perimeter while we prepared the trap. We approached the estate on foot, using service entrances and blind spots in the security camera network that the mercenaries wouldn't know existed. The pre-dawn darkness was our ally, along with our intimate knowledge of every shadow and sightline. "If this goes wrong," Yejun started as we positioned ourselves in the control room adjacent to the gallery. "It won't." I pulled up the climate system interface, my hands steady despite the fear singing through my veins. "Trust me." "I do." His hand covered mine on the keyboard. "That's what terrifies me." The mercenaries reached the East Wing Gallery exactly as predicted, their tactical lights cutting through the darkness. 8 figures, professionally equipped, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of military training. "Now," I whispered, initiating the lockdown protocol. The gallery's reinforced doors slammed shut with hydraulic certainty. The windows, already bulletproof, engaged their secondary security measures, effectively sealing the space. And deep within the mansion's infrastructure, the HVAC system began flooding the gallery with nitrogen-enriched air, systematically displacing oxygen. The mercenaries realized their mistake within seconds. Weapons trained on doors that wouldn't budge. Attempts to breach the windows resulting in fractured wrists as the reinforced glass held. Increasingly desperate radio chatter as they understood they were trapped. 2 minutes, Min said, watching his tablet. Oxygen saturation at 14% and falling. I forced myself to watch the feeds as the mercenaries began to succumb, first confusion, then panic, then the inevitable loss of consciousness as their bodies were starved of oxygen. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't painless. But it was justice of a kind. "That's 7. Yejun counted as figures slumped to the gallery floor. "Where's the 8th? The answer came in the form of shattering glass, not from the gallery but from the conservatory where I'd worked for months. A figure in tactical gear, separated from his team, had found an alternate route. "Gracie, get down!" Yejun moved with lethal grace, positioning himself between me and the threat, his weapon appearing in his hand with practiced ease. But the mercenary wasn't aiming for me. His weapon tracked toward the control panel, toward the system I'd just used to incapacitate his team. I acted without thinking. My hand slammed down on the emergency override, and every magnetic lock in the mansion disengaged simultaneously, including the one on the gallery door. The mercenary's eyes widened as he realized what I'd done. I'd freed his unconscious teammates, but I'd also activated every alarm and brought every security measure online. The mansion itself became a hunting ground, and we knew it far better than he did. Yejun moved. One moment he was beside me. The next he'd closed the distance to the mercenary with inhuman speed. The fight was brief and brutal, professionally trained soldier versus man who'd spent a lifetime surviving in a world where weakness meant death. Yejun won. He secured the unconscious mercenary with practiced efficiency, then turned to find me standing in the doorway, gripping a bronze bust of Mars like a bludgeon, my breath coming in gasps. "I had him," Yejun said, amusement flickering through the adrenaline. "I know." I lowered the extinguisher with shaking hands. But I wasn't going to watch and do nothing. His expression softened. He crossed to me, taking the extinguisher and setting it aside before pulling me into his arms. "You trapped 7 trained killers with museum preservation technology. I think you've done enough." I buried my face in his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart gradually slow to match mine. Around us, the mansion's security team was moving in to secure the unconscious mercenaries. Min was coordinating with local police, explaining the home invasion in terms that would satisfy legal requirements while obscuring certain details about who exactly lived here. "Is it over?" I asked against Yejun's shirt. "Is it finally over? The immediate threat?" "Yes." His hand stroked through my curls, the gesture grounding. "But Gracie, this life, my life, it's not going to be simple. There will always be threats, always be people who see you as leverage against me." "I know." I pulled back to meet his eyes. "I'm not asking for simple. I'm asking if this particular nightmare is finished. Zach is in custody. His hired killers are neutralized. The federal case against you is dead." Yejun's hand cupped my face. "This particular nightmare is over, and we can finally start building something that isn't founded on survival strategy." "About that," I caught his hand, holding it against my cheek. "You promised me after Jakarta, after Zach was finished, and I was free. Well, Zach is finished, and I'm free, so I'm asking." His eyes darkened with the kind of heat that made my knees weak. "Asking what, exactly? Show me." My voice was steady despite the way my pulse raced. "Show me what it means to be yours." For a long moment, he just looked at me, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign I wasn't ready. When he found none, his smile was pure sin and promise. "Come with me," he said, taking my hand and leading me through the mansion toward his wing. Dawn was breaking through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold and rose. We passed Min, who took one look at our joined hands and very diplomatically found somewhere else to be. Yejun's suite was exactly as I remembered from the one night I'd sought comfort there, spare, elegant, somehow both martial and intimate. But this time, I wasn't seeking comfort. I was seeking consummation of every promise we'd made in the shadows and the spaces between words. He closed the door behind us, and suddenly the air felt charged with possibility and anticipation. "Last chance," he said, though his hands were already finding my waist. "Last chance to change your mind. To say this is too fast. Too much. I've been waiting 3 months." I stepped into his space, my hands finding his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath my palms. "I'm done waiting." His control shattered like glass. His mouth found mine in a kiss that was nothing like the others. This was claiming, without restraint. Hunger finally unleashed. His hands mapped me with possessive thoroughness, learning every curve, every response, every place that made me gasp. "Tell me to stop," he demanded against my throat, his teeth grazing the pulse point there. "Tell me you don't want this, and I will." "But Gracie," his hands tightened on my hips, "if you don't stop me now, I won't be gentle, I won't be patient. I'm going to take what I've been promised and make sure you forget every touch that came before mine." "Then stop talking," I said, finding his mouth again. "And show me." The world narrowed to sensation, the rasp of fabric as clothes disappeared, the heat of skin meeting skin, the devastating intimacy of being seen and wanted and claimed. He kept his promise. He wasn't gentle. He wasn't patient. He was consuming and thorough and absolutely devastating in his focus. And when he finally made me his in truth, and not just name, when I shattered around him with his name on my lips and his hands anchoring me to reality, I understood why he'd made me wait. This wasn't just satisfaction. This was transformation, the final burning away of who I'd been and the claiming of who I'd become. After wrapped in silk sheets with dawn painting patterns across skin, he traced lazy patterns on my spine and asked, "Regrets?" "Only that we didn't do this sooner," I admitted, turning to face him. The vulnerability in his expression caught me off guard, this dangerous man looking almost uncertain in the aftermath. "I love you," he said simply. "I've loved you since I read your name on a thesis 10 years ago. I've loved you through every minute of waiting, watching, wanting, and I'll love you through whatever comes next." The confession should have terrified me. Instead, it felt like the final piece clicking into place. "I love you too," I whispered back. "And I'm choosing this. Choosing you. Choosing us." His kiss was tender this time, a promise rather than a claiming. "Mine," he murmured against my lips. "Yours," I agreed. "But Yejun, I need you to know something." "What?" "That conservatory glass you just replaced? That mercenary I trapped? That fire extinguisher I was going to brain him with?" I met his eyes. "I'm not your damsel anymore. I'm your partner, your equal. And the next threat that comes for us, we face it together." His laugh was full of pride and love and dark promise. I wouldn't have it any other way. Outside, the sun rose over the estate, painting everything in gold. Inside, tangled together in sheets that smelled of cedar and sex and new beginnings, we planned our future not built on survival, but on choice, on recognition, on love forged in fire and tempered by time. The nightmare was over. But the story, our story, was just beginning. The investigation took 3 more weeks to officially close. Federal prosecutors released a statement clearing me of all charges, citing new evidence and recanted testimony. Zach pleaded guilty to fraud, art theft, and conspiracy. The life insurance policy and hired killers were quietly folded into his sentence without my name appearing in any public documents. My sister disappeared into obscurity, her immunity deal worthless once Zach's case collapsed. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt the peculiar emptiness that came with closure, like finishing a masterpiece restoration, only to realize the painting would hang in someone else's gallery. Except I wasn't empty. I was terrified. "You're thinking too loud," Yejun said from across the breakfast table. 3 weeks of waking up in his bed, and the domesticity of it still caught me off guard, this dangerous man reading the Times over coffee while I pretended to focus on auction catalogs. "I'm thinking at an appropriate," I started. "Volume, yes, I know." He lowered the paper, and the weight of his attention made my breath catch even now. "But you're not thinking about art. You're thinking about the dinner, tonight. The dinner where I'd meet his family, not just his lieutenants or his security team, but his mother, his aunts, the matriarchs of the Kong family who held real power behind the throne. I'm thinking I don't know how to be what they expect," I admitted, abandoning the pretense of the catalog. "I'm not Korean. I'm not from this world. I'm the art historian you married to settle a debt, And now you're the woman I love, Yejun interrupted, rising to move around the table. His hands settled on my shoulders, thumbs working the tension there. Now you're my wife. Now you're the person who trapped 8 mercenaries with museum technology and then threatened to brain the 9th with a fire extinguisher. That's not going to impress your mother, I said, but I was leaning into his touch. My mother, Yejun said carefully, has survived 3 decades as the widow of a Kangpei boss. She'll respect strength far more than she respects traditional femininity. His lips found the shell of my ear. Trust me, she's going to love you. I wasn't convinced, but I nodded anyway. The dinner was held in the mansion's formal dining room, a space I'd never seen used, all dark wood and subdued lighting that somehow felt both elegant and vaguely threatening. Yejun's mother arrived first, a small woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Kong, I said, offering my hand. It's an honor to meet you. She ignored my hand and instead studied me with the kind of thorough assessment I'd only ever received from museum curators evaluating a new acquisition. Finally, she spoke in accented but precise English. You are not what I expected. I'm sorry, I started, but she held up a hand. I expected someone who needed my son's protection, someone fragile who would require constant defense. Her gaze sharpened. But Yejun tells me you turned his home into a trap for hired killers, that you use oxygen deprivation like a weapon, that you destroyed the man who tried to use you in a federal deposition without raising your voice. I had good teachers, I managed, acutely aware of Yejun beside me, tension coiled in his frame. Yes, his mother agreed. You did. My son has been preparing for you for 10 years. I'm pleased to see you were worth the wait. She turned to Yejun, switching to rapid Korean that I couldn't follow. Whatever she said made him relax fractionally and respond with obvious affection. She approves, he translated when his mother moved to greet the other arriving family members. She says, you have the eyes of someone who knows how to protect what's valuable. Your mother is terrifying, I whispered. Yes. His smile was pure pride. But so are you. That's why you'll get along. The dinner was a revelation. I'd expected interrogation, judgment, the subtle undermining I'd experienced from Zach's family. Instead, I found curiosity. Yejun's aunts wanted to know about my work, my restoration techniques, the paintings I'd authenticated. His cousins, some legitimate business owners, others clearly connected to the family's less legal enterprises, treated me with the kind of respect usually reserved for made members of the organization. And through it all, Yejun's hand on my knee under the table, steady and grounding, reminded me I wasn't performing for their approval. I was simply existing in his world, and that was enough. Tell me, Yejun's mother said when the meal was winding down, about the Caravaggio. The room went quiet. Every eye turned to me. Which one? I asked carefully, knowing there were 3 in Yejun's collection. The one you didn't know you were revealing. Her smile was sharp. My son tells me you spent 6 months carefully removing centuries of overpainting without realizing you were uncovering a lost masterpiece. That your ex-fiancé deliberately fed you false provenance to keep you from understanding the value of your own work. That's correct, I confirmed, unsure where this was leading. And now that you know? She leaned forward, and I felt the weight of her full attention. Now that you understand your genius was weaponized, what will you do with it? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications I was only beginning to understand. I'm going to do what I should have done from the beginning, I said slowly, the answer crystallizing as I spoke. I'm going to authenticate the truth. Not what collectors want to hear, not what increases value, just the truth, regardless of consequences. Yejun's hand tightened on my knee, pride and possession in equal measure. Good, his mother said. Because the Kong family's collection needs a curator, someone who understands value beyond price, someone who can't be bought or intimidated into false authentication. She stood, the gesture somehow signaling the dinner's end. Someone who trapped 8 mercenaries with museum technology and threatened to brain the 9th with a fire extinguisher. I blinked, looking between her and Yejun. You told her that part? I told her everything, Yejun said, rising with me. She needed to know who you are, what you're capable of, why I waited a decade. His mother approached me, taking my hands in hers, the first touch she'd initiated all evening. My son chose you over every eligible woman in our world. He married you to save you, then fell in love with you despite every rational reason not to. Do you understand what that means? That he's insane? I offered weakly. Her laugh was sharp and genuine. That you're family now. Not by blood, but by choice. And in this world, choice is more binding than blood. She squeezed my hands. Welcome, daughter. I hope you're prepared for what comes next. The other family members echoed the sentiment as they departed. Cousins offering business cards. Aunts inviting me to gallery openings. Uncles making slightly threatening promises about protecting me from anyone foolish enough to threaten the Kong family. When the last guest finally left, I collapsed onto the couch in Yejun's study, my mind reeling. That went well, Yejun said, pouring us both scotch. Your family just recruited me, I said, accepting the glass. Your mother offered me a job. Your cousins invited me to what I'm pretty sure were money laundering operations, disguised as art shows. Your uncle threatened to kill anyone who looks at me wrong. Yes. Yejun settled beside me, his arm coming around my shoulders. That's what happens when the family approves. You become one of us. I'm not... I stopped, because the protest felt hollow. I was one of them now. I'd proven it in blood and battle, and the ruthless dismantling of my enemies. What did I just agree to? To be yourself. His lips found my temple. To use your genius without apology. To protect what's valuable: art, family, truth. He paused. And to be my partner in every sense of the word, not the collateral bride, not the asset to protect. My equal. The word settled over me like a crown and a blessing and a burden all at once. There's something else, Yejun said, and the shift in his tone made me pull back to see his face. Something I've been waiting to show you until I knew you were truly choosing this life. He led me through the mansion to a door I'd never seen, opened hidden behind a bookshelf in the library. Accessible only via biometric lock that accepted both our handprints. The door opened onto a staircase descending into darkness. Another vault? I guessed. A workshop. He flicked on lights, revealing a space that stole my breath. It was my restoration lab from the conservatory, but elevated to an impossible level. Equipment I'd only ever seen in major museums. Pigment libraries organized with obsessive precision. Climate controls calibrated to archival standards. And covering every available surface paintings. Dozens of them. Hundreds, perhaps. What is this? I moved through the space in a daze, recognizing pieces from art theft databases, from insurance claims, from the endless list of masterworks that had vanished over the decades. The Kong family's real collection, Yejun said quietly. The pieces we've recovered from black market sales, from criminals who didn't know what they had, from collectors who prioritized possession over preservation. He gestured to the nearest painting, a Dutch still life in desperate need of restoration. They're stolen, Gracie. All of them. And they need to go home. Understanding crashed over me. You want me to restore them, to document them, to return them. I want you to save them. He moved to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. My father built this collection through theft and violence. I've spent the last decade trying to undo that damage, buying pieces back, recovering what I can. But I can't return them without proof of authenticity, without proper restoration, without someone I trust implicitly to do the work without corrupting it for profit. You want me to be your redemption, I breathed. I want you to be my partner in giving these masterpieces their truth back. His grip tightened. Every piece you restore and document, I'll return to its rightful home. Anonymous donations, no credit, no recognition, just the art, going back where it belongs. I stared at the workshop, at years of work stretching before me, at the impossible task of restoring and repatriating a collection that represented decades of crime. There's a Raphael, I said, having spotted it in the far corner. And I think that's the Vermeer that disappeared from the Gardner Museum. Yes, this is insane. But I was already calculating the work required, the techniques I'd need, the documentation that would be necessary. Completely, Yejun agreed. But so is marrying a mafia boss to escape federal charges. So is falling in love with the man who's been watching you for a decade. So is building a life together that's founded on art and crime and redemption in equal measure. I turned to face him, this beautiful, dangerous man who'd saved me and claimed me and offered me a purpose I hadn't known I needed. I'll need proper ventilation, and better lighting in that corner, and someone who can source pigments without alerting the FBI. His smile was triumphant. Done. Anything else? Yes. I pulled him close, my hands fisting in his shirt. Promise me that every piece I restore and return, you'll stop calling it redemption. We're not erasing your father's crimes. We're just choosing something better. Something better, he echoed, kissing me with the kind of tenderness that still caught me off guard. I can work with that. We stood in that underground workshop surrounded by stolen beauty and the promise of restoration, and I understood finally what his mother had meant about choice being more binding than blood. I'd chosen this, the danger and the beauty, the crime and the redemption, the man and the mission. I'd chosen to be the queen of a kingdom built on shadows and art and the ruthless pursuit of truth. And God help me, I'd never been more certain of anything in my life. 3 months later, I stood in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, watching museum staff carefully unwrap a painting that had been anonymously donated. The restoration documentation I'd provided was flawless enough to prove authenticity without revealing where the piece had spent the last 30 years. Yejun stood beside me, just another wealthy tourist admiring the return of a lost Botticelli. His hand found mine, squeezing gently as the museum director gave a press conference about the miraculous recovery. 1 down, he murmured. 247 to go. 246, I corrected. The Vermeer goes back to Boston next month. His pride was palpable. My brilliant, terrifying wife. Your partner, I corrected, turning to meet his eyes. In crime, in redemption, in everything, he agreed, kissing me there in the gallery surrounded by masterpieces and tourists, and the promise of a future we were building together, not perfect, not simple, but entirely and irrevocably ours. Later, on the flight back to New York, I pulled out my tablet and updated my working list of restorations. Beside each piece, I'd noted not just the technical requirements, but the emotional cost, the history of each work, the families it had been stolen from, the justice that returning it would serve. What are you thinking? Yejun asked from across the cabin, scotch in hand, watching me with that intensity that still made my breath catch. I'm thinking that I was wrong about something, I said, setting the tablet aside. That day in the cathedral, I thought I was just collateral damage, a tool someone else had used and discarded. And now I know I was never damaged. I was just incomplete. I met his eyes. I was a masterpiece, with centuries of overpainting, obscuring what was underneath. And you gave me the tools to strip away what other people had added and reveal what was always there. His smile was soft, rare, the kind he only showed when we were alone. And what was always there? A woman who knows her value, I said simply. A woman who chooses her own battles. A woman who loves a dangerous man and builds something beautiful from the ruins he inherited. Yejun crossed the cabin to kneel beside my seat, taking my hands in his. I love you, Grace Leonard Kong. I loved the potential I saw 10 years ago, and I love the reality even more. I love you too, I whispered, leaning down to kiss him. My guardian devil, my patient hunter, my partner in redemption. Forever? He asked against my lips. Forever, I promised. And in that moment, suspended between continents and lives, surrounded by the ghosts of stolen art and the promise of returned beauty, I understood that I'd found something even rarer than a lost masterpiece. I'd found myself, and I'd found him, and that was worth every moment of the nightmare that had led me here. The collateral bride had become the queen, and the debt was finally, impossibly, joyfully paid in full.